She was known as one of Europe's most beautiful and influential queens. The granddaughter of two of the world's most powerful monarchs, Britain's Queen Victoria and Russia's Tsar Alexander II, she inherited a taste for grandeur and a collection of fabulous jewels. Her Russian heritage was a source of both her pride and her wealth. But this fateful connection to Russia, which should have been her ultimate protection, would become the greatest loss of her life. This is the story of Queen Marie of Romania, a story of how she lost everything, only to gain something even greater, and how her treasures, after surviving the fall of empires, told her story to the world. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. Our story begins in 1875, on a crisp October day at Eastwell Manor in the English countryside of Kent. Here, a baby girl was born who would grow up to become one of Europe's most fascinating queens, though she didn't know it yet. Princess Marie entered the world with perhaps the most extraordinary bloodline of her generation. Her father, Prince Alfred, was the beloved son of Queen Victoria herself, while her mother, Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna, was the only daughter of Tsar Alexander II of Russia. Can you imagine having such powerful grandparents? This tiny infant held the legacy of two of the most influential empires in 19th century Europe. But Marie's childhood was far from the fairy tale you might expect. Her mother, despite her grand title and magnificent Russian jewels, was emotionally distant from her children. A cold figure who left Marie craving the warmth she'd later pour into her own relationships. The family moved constantly across Europe, living between England and Germany, with a particularly memorable stay in Malta during the late 1880s, when her father commanded the Royal Navy's Mediterranean fleet there. Marie would later remember those Mediterranean days fondly, perhaps because they offered some stability in an otherwise nomadic childhood. As Marie grew into her teens, the inevitable question arose: who would this granddaughter of empires marry? For a brief moment, there was talk of her wedding her first cousin George, the second son of the Prince of Wales. But fate had other plans. When George's older brother Albert Victor died suddenly in 1892, George found himself directly in line for the English throne and was quickly betrothed to Mary of Teck instead. I find it fascinating how one death could completely redirect the course of a young woman's entire life, don't you? With the English option closed, Marie's family turned their attention to a more exotic possibility: Prince Ferdinand of Romania, heir to a kingdom that most Europeans could barely locate on a map. Romania was still a young nation, having gained independence from the Ottoman Empire only 15 years earlier. To many in sophisticated European circles, it felt almost mythical, mysterious, even slightly dangerous. Bram Stoker was writing his famous Dracula just as Marie was preparing for her new life, setting his vampire tale in the very region where she would soon become a crown princess. The timing feels almost too perfect, doesn't it? At just 17 years old, an age when most girls today are still in school, Marie packed her belongings and left England forever. She traveled by train across Europe to Sigmaringen Castle in southern Germany, where she married Ferdinand on January 10, 1893, in a ceremony that was both Catholic and Protestant to accommodate their different faiths. Then came another train journey, this time into Romania itself, into a world that would challenge everything she thought she knew about royal life. The Romania Marie entered was nothing like the established courts of England or Russia. Her new father-in-law, King Carol I, was a domineering German prince who ruled his household with an iron fist. Her husband Ferdinand, while kind-hearted, was painfully shy and never dared challenge his uncle's authority. But perhaps most shocking of all was the discovery that her children would be taken from her care almost immediately after birth. King Carol believed royal children should be raised in separate households by governesses and tutors, not by their mothers. Yet, something remarkable happened during those early difficult years. Rather than retreat into bitterness, Marie began to find her voice and her place. The Romanian people, perhaps sensing her genuine spirit beneath all that royal protocol, began to warm to their young crown princess. She was learning a crucial lesson that would serve her throughout her life. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from having power handed to you, but from fighting to claim your own space in the world. Little did anyone know that this young woman, still adjusting to life in her adopted country, would one day become the driving force behind Romania's greatest territorial expansion and international recognition. But that transformation was still years away, waiting for a world war that would test every assumption about monarchy, loyalty, and survival itself. Now that we've met Marie in her new Romanian home, let me take you on a journey through the glittering world of her first jewelry collection, a treasure trove that represented not just wealth, but the very essence of old European royalty. When Marie wrote to her mother about her wedding gifts, her words sparkled with genuine delight. "Mama gave me a wonderful trousseau, a real princess's trousseau. I was a real daughter of Eve and loved clothes, furs, and precious gems." This wasn't just royal modesty. It was the honest confession of a young woman who truly understood that she was living in an age of unprecedented luxury. Let's start with the crown jewel of Marie's early collection, her diamond loop tiara. This magnificent piece came from her mother, Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna, and it was far more than just another wedding gift. The tiara featured elegant diamond loops that seemed to dance across the wearer's brow, each one catching the light in the most enchanting way. What strikes me most about this piece is how it perfectly embodied Marie's dual heritage. Its design was remarkably similar to the famous loop tiaras owned by the Russian imperial family, particularly the one belonging to Grand Duchess Vladimir. Marie wore this tiara like other women might wear their favorite necklace. It became her signature piece throughout the 1890s and early 1900s. She chose it for her sister, Victoria Melita's wedding to the Grand Duke of Hesse in 1894, for family gatherings, and for those dramatic portrait sessions she loved so much. Remember this tiara well, because its fate holds the key to our entire story. It was the symbol of her Russian soul, and ironically, it would be in Russia where its trail would vanish forever. There's something particularly poignant about how Marie treasured this gift from her emotionally distant mother. Perhaps wearing it made her feel closer to the woman who had given her life but so little warmth. The tiara appeared in an exhibition in Coburg in 1903, displayed alongside jewels from Marie's mother and sisters, a glittering family portrait frozen in diamonds and gold. Now, if the diamond loops represented her Russian heritage, the turquoise parure was pure English elegance. Her father, the Duke of Edinburgh, commissioned this superb set from Carrington of Regent Street, a tiara, necklace, and earrings, all featuring clusters of fine turquoise surrounded by diamonds. But here's where Marie's personality truly begins to emerge. By 1904, just 11 years into her marriage, she had already grown restless with her original turquoise tiara. In a letter to her mother on her birthday, she revealed her solution. "Nando did not give me anything as I asked him to have my turquoises mounted for me as Christmas and birthday present combined, as he can't spend much upon presents. I wanted to have the turquoises mounted into a bigger crown as the other was so small that it disappeared in my hair." She took apart her father's beautiful gift and reimagined it as something grander, a diadem of 7 crosses with large cluster turquoises at their centers, set on a base decorated with Greek key ornaments. The skilled jewelers at Kreuter & Co. in Hanau brought her vision to life, creating a piece that could also be worn as 7 separate brooches. The third cornerstone of Marie's early collection came not from her birth family, but from her adopted country. Queen Elizabeth of Romania, the artistic soul known to the literary world as Carmen Silva, presented Marie with the spectacular Romanian Masson tiara. Created by the renowned jeweler Oscar Masson, this piece featured 16 large upright pearls that gave it an almost architectural quality, regal yet somehow approachable. This gift carried deep symbolic weight. Queen Elizabeth, having no children of her own, was essentially passing the torch to Marie, acknowledging her as the future of the Romanian royal house. Marie treasured this connection to her new homeland and wore the Masson tiara frequently through the early 1910s, particularly as political tensions began to mount across Europe. Looking at Marie's early collection now, I'm struck by how it perfectly captured the spirit of Europe before the Great War. Here were diamonds from Russia, turquoise from England, pearls from Romania, jewels that represented not just wealth, but the intricate web of relationships that bound the continent's royal families together. Each piece told a story of alliance, affection, and the shared assumption that this glittering world would continue forever. Marie's jewelry reflected the confidence of an era that believed in permanence. These weren't just accessories. They were investments in a future that everyone assumed would mirror the prosperous past. When she posed for those theatrical portraits in her silver room at Cotroceni Palace, surrounded by Celtic engravings and animal skins, wearing her diamond loops and ropes of pearls, she was unconsciously documenting a way of life that was already living on borrowed time. But 1914 was approaching like a storm on the horizon, and this unity that Marie's collection embodied would soon be shattered by the very forces that had seemed to guarantee its permanence. As we'll see, Marie's greatest test wasn't just losing her jewels, it was losing the world they represented, and then finding the strength to build something entirely new from the ruins. The world we just left, that glittering, interconnected Europe of royal cousins and magnificent jewels, was a fragile one. And in the summer of 1914, it shattered. The outbreak of the First World War changed everything. For Marie, this was not just a distant political crisis, it was a profound personal turning point. In October of that year, King Carol I died, and her husband ascended the throne as King Ferdinand. Marie, at the height of a global conflict, became Queen of Romania. And in the crucible of this war, the princess we knew was forged into a monarch of extraordinary strength and compassion. She threw herself into the war effort not from the safety of a palace, but from the front lines. She became a Red Cross nurse, working tirelessly in field hospitals that were often more dangerous than the battlefield itself. These makeshift centers were stalked by a virulent cholera outbreak, yet Marie famously refused to wear a protective mask. She argued that to do so would dehumanize the sick and dying in their last moments. Can you just take a moment to absorb that? The same woman who adored beautiful gowns and priceless gems was now holding the hands of dying soldiers, offering comfort in the face of a terrifying epidemic. It's a powerful statement of character, and it tells you everything about the kind of queen she was becoming. Her people saw this, and they adored her for it. She was no longer just a foreign-born princess. She was their queen, the mother of the nation. But as the war raged on and the Central Powers advanced, Romania found itself in a perilous position. By 1916, with much of the country occupied, a desperate decision was made. To protect the nation's wealth from falling into enemy hands, the entire Romanian treasury, gold bars, securities, the national bank's assets, was to be sent to an ally for safekeeping. And the safest place in the world, it was decided, was Moscow. Russia was not only an ally in the war, it was the homeland of Marie's mother, ruled by her own Romanov cousins. It seemed like the most logical choice. Along with the state treasury, packed into 1738 crates, were two smaller boxes. Inside them lay Queen Marie's entire personal jewelry collection: the diamond loop tiara, the reimagined turquoise cross tiara, the Masson pearls, and countless other pieces valued at an immense 7 million gold lei. Now, from our vantage point in history, this decision seems almost tragically flawed. But at the time, who could have possibly predicted that the mighty Russian Empire, which had stood for centuries, was itself on the brink of total collapse? For a time, the jewels were safe. They were handed over to the Romanian minister in Petrograd, who, as the political situation deteriorated, passed them to the American consul. When he left, they were entrusted to the Norwegian consul in Moscow. And this is where the trail of the jewels goes cold, but it doesn't end. Instead, it turns into something of a spy thriller. At the end of 1918, the Norwegian consulate staff also had to evacuate. In a final, desperate act to protect the treasure, the consul secretly hid the 2 boxes of jewels inside a wall of the consulate villa at number 15 Karatonov Street. Only one person in Moscow was left with the knowledge of this secret, a former Russian servant at the consulate. Sometime later, this servant fell gravely ill. But before he died, he confided the secret to a German citizen, a certain Mr. K, telling him the exact location of the hidden treasure. A few years later, in 1923, Mr. K, now living in Germany, saw his chance. He contacted the Soviet embassy in Berlin and proposed a deal. He would reveal the location of the lost royal jewels in exchange for a percentage of their value. The Soviets, intrigued, agreed verbally, and Mr. K traveled to Moscow. But upon his arrival, he was met with a clever deception. Officials told him that the villa was now occupied by the Czechoslovak mission and that the matter was too delicate to proceed with. They told him to wait. He was, of course, being played. Just 3 months later, in September 1923, a group of men dressed as plumbers arrived at the villa. They presented an official order stating that the water pipes in the walls urgently needed repair to prevent the building from collapsing. The Czechoslovak mission staff were temporarily moved to the 2nd floor. Over the next few days, the workers systematically broke into the wall on the 1st floor, located the boxes, and quietly removed them. Queen Marie's jewels were discovered and transported to a Soviet state warehouse. They had vanished. Marie, who had fought so hard for her country and emerged from the war a victor, had lost her entire personal history in the one place she believed it to be safe. The loss was absolute and irreversible. She would later write, with a palpable sense of grief, "Mama had been extraordinarily prodigal, giving many of her own magnificent Russian gems. These have all now been annexed by the Bolsheviks." For any other woman, this devastating loss might have been the end of the story. But for Queen Marie, it was merely the end of the 1st chapter. Having lost everything, she was about to rise from the ashes and build a new collection, one that would be even more spectacular and more legendary than the first. The war was won. Romania had emerged victorious, and Queen Marie was a national hero. But her personal triumph was shadowed by that immense private loss. Her jewel box was empty, a silent testament to the empire that had consumed her treasures. For Marie, it was a call to action. She was no longer just a queen consort. She was a vital political force, and she understood better than anyone that in the world of diplomacy and power, symbols mattered immensely. Her moment came at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. The world, weary from war, was being remade by powerful men in smoke-filled rooms. And into this world walked Queen Marie. She was not an official delegate, but she quickly became the most effective ambassador her country could have wished for. Marie's performance at the Paris Peace Conference was masterful political theater. She understood that in the aftermath of such devastation, the world craved not just peace, but spectacle, not just treaties, but dreams of restoration. She charmed the Allied leaders, the historical records note with characteristic understatement. She wasn't there to ask. She was there to advocate, to persuade, to ensure her country's sacrifices were recognized. And she succeeded spectacularly. The world, which had just witnessed the fall of 3 great empires, watched in awe as this one queen almost single-handedly secured the borders of what would become Greater Romania. Romania emerged with 17 million subjects and an additional 295,000 square kilometers of territory. Marie had not merely secured Romania's future, she had doubled it. When she and Ferdinand were crowned at Alba Iulia on October 15, 1922, they ruled an empire that would have made their predecessors dizzy with ambition. So, she needed a collection that reflected this newfound stature, and her husband, King Ferdinand, gave her a generous sum to build it. And where would she find such jewels, worthy of her new status? As it turns out, the answer lay heartbreakingly close to home, intertwined with the very revolution that had cost her so much. Her own sister, Princess Victoria Melita, known as Ducky, had married into the Russian imperial family and had barely escaped the revolution with her life. Now in exile, she and her husband, Grand Duke Kirill, were forced to sell their magnificent jewels to survive. Among them was a truly legendary piece, the Vladimir Sapphire Kokoshnik. This tiara, created by Cartier in 1909 for the formidable Grand Duchess Vladimir, was an imperial jewel in every sense of the word. It featured enormous Romanov sapphires, including a central cushion-cut stone of an incredible 137.2 carats. And so, in a twist of fate laden with a poignant irony, Marie began to rebuild her collection. She wrote to her mother about the purchase, and her words reveal a profound mix of emotions. It is, however, a horrible feeling to take these treasures from a person I love more than anything in the world, but at the same time, I know that I am a gift from God to her, as I am ready to pay for the pieces in full and right away without negotiating the prices. Oh, and heaven, these jewels are wonderful, as seldom one can find. Losing her Russian jewels in Russia, she now bought other Russian jewels that had been saved from Russia, from her own beloved sister. This tiara wasn't just a replacement, it was a refugee, a survivor, and it found a new home with a queen who understood its story all too well. The Vladimir Sapphire Kokoshnik became Marie's signature piece, perfectly suited to her theatrical personality. She wore it for her coronation in 1922, making it the crown jewel of ceremonies designed to invoke Romania's glorious past while celebrating its expanded future. If the Vladimir Kokoshnik represented redemption, then the massive Cartier sapphire pendant represented pure ambition. The 478.68 carat sapphire had entered Cartier's collection in 1913, becoming their most valuable offering at the autumn exhibition in San Sebastian. Among the admirers were Queen Victoria Eugenie of Spain and Queen Mother Maria Cristina. But when the moment came for King Alfonso XIII to open his coffers, he delivered one of history's most short-sighted royal pronouncements. Only the nouveau riche can afford such luxuries. We kings are the nouveau pauvre of today. How wrong he was. While Alfonso counted coins, Ferdinand of Romania purchased the magnificent sapphire for 1,275,000 francs in 1922. The timing was perfect. Ferdinand and Marie were preparing for their coronation, and the Cartier sapphire, suspended from its diamond sautoir, became the perfect complement to Marie's newly acquired Vladimir Kokoshnik. The portrait painted by Philip de Laszlo in 1924 captured this triumph perfectly. Marie sits adorned with both the sapphire Kokoshnik and the great pendant, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. The sapphire, rejected by one monarch as excessive, became the symbol of another's renaissance. And she wasn't finished. At the same time, she turned her attention to some pearls she had inherited from her mother's Fabergé tiara. She took them to Cartier and had them reset into a new, striking pearl and diamond tiara in a more modern style. But the golden age of the 1920s, like all golden ages, could not last forever. For Queen Marie, the later years of her life were marked by personal and political turmoil. Her beloved husband, King Ferdinand, died in 1927, and her relationship with her own son, the controversial King Carol II, became deeply strained. She passed away in 1938, just before the world was once again plunged into the darkness of war. And with the end of the Second World War came the end of the Romanian monarchy itself, and the fate of her magnificent second collection became as dramatic and poignant as the story of the first. Upon Marie's death, her jewels were divided among her children, and the most magnificent of them all, the Vladimir Sapphire Kokoshnik, was inherited by her youngest and most beloved daughter, Princess Ileana. But Ileana's life, like her mother's, was destined to be shaped by war and upheaval. After her nephew, King Michael, was forced to abdicate by the communists in 1947, Ileana and her family began a long journey into exile. She managed to save the tiara, and her account of its travels is just extraordinary. Lacking the funds to insure such a priceless object, she simply wrapped it in her nightgown and carried it with her in a small bag from Romania to Switzerland to Argentina and finally to the United States. Its final, noble duty was not to glitter at a state ball, but to give an exiled princess the means to build a new home for her children. She eventually sold it, and her words on this decision are some of the most moving I've ever read from a royal. She wrote, "It was both beautiful and splendid, but my children were in need. As it stood, it neither fed us, nor clothed us, nor warmed us. I could not even wear it." And what of the other great treasures from Marie's second collection? Their stories are no less touched by the tides of history. The colossal 478-carat Cartier sapphire, along with its diamond sautoir, was inherited by her grandson, King Michael. Facing the harsh realities of life in exile, he eventually sold the great sapphire. It was later acquired by a Greek collector and presented to Queen Frederica of Greece, and today it resides safely in a museum collection. The diamond sautoir, however, has a more mysterious fate. There's a fascinating anecdote from Hans Nadelhofer, the author of a book on Cartier. He once asked King Michael's wife, Queen Anne, about the sautoir. She replied she had no idea of its whereabouts. But later, when she took him upstairs to see a piece, he found parts of the great necklace lying at the bottom of her jewel box. And so, a historic jewel, once the centerpiece of a coronation, becomes a handful of stones holding on to their memories. And so the story of Queen Marie's treasures comes full circle. Her first collection, born of the splendor of Imperial Russia, vanished in the fire of the revolution that consumed it. Her second, built from the ashes of the old world as a symbol of her own unbreakable will, was itself sacrificed, scattered across the globe to ensure the survival of her family. But the memory of the queen herself proved more durable than diamonds. In Romania, she is still revered as the mother of the nation, a warrior queen and a brilliant diplomat. Her jewels, both the lost and the found, remain the perfect symbols of her incredible destiny, a destiny forever bound to her fatal and generous Russian heritage. What a truly remarkable woman Queen Marie was. Her life was a study in contrasts, of immense privilege and devastating loss, of imperial grandeur and profound personal sacrifice. I'd be so fascinated to know, what is the lasting impression she leaves on you? Do you see a powerful monarch defined by her triumphs, or a tragic figure shaped by her immense losses? And what of her jewels? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoy these deep dives into the stories behind the world's most famous jewels, please do consider subscribing and giving this video a like. Until next time.